Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl, and this is going to be my reaction video to the news that came out earlier today that Doug Pederson is going to be the next head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. Start by talking a little bit about my day and some of the news that came out and some of my emotions as I was hearing it. First of all, of course, this morning there was reports out that the Eagles were in serious negotiations with Tom Coughlin and were really pursuing possibly hiring him as the next head coach. For those of you who saw the video I did breaking down all the candidates, you know I was not a fan of that move. I really thought that that was problematic for a number of reasons. You can watch the video. I'll put a link in the description below for you to, if you want to see that video and exactly why I thought that was a bad idea. But at any rate, I was really concerned about that. Then I had some relief later in the afternoon when it came out that no, he had withdrawn from consideration and did not want to take the coaching job with the Eagles. But then, of course, as the afternoon progressed, then people were like, well, where are they going to go? And it obviously looked like it was going to have to either be Pat Shurmur or Doug Pederson based on the guys that they had already interviewed and those that were still available. So I had a little concern when people were saying it probably is going to be Pat Shurmur. That would make the most sense, especially if they're going to make the announcement this week, because they can't do any announcement for Doug Pederson until the Chiefs are out of the playoffs. So I was a little concerned about that because I wasn't real high on Pat Shurmur. I would have been okay with it, but I wasn't really high on him. Of those two, I certainly would have preferred Doug Pederson. So imagine the relief I got again then later when I found out that Doug Pederson was the one that they are going to be hiring for this job. Now, I know a lot of Eagles fans are not excited about this. They remember him as a player when he was here. And the fact that, you know, as a quarterback, he wasn't that great, and he basically was a placeholder until Donovan McNabb was ready to really take the reins as a rookie. So from that perspective, I think that's the memory that most people have of Doug Pederson. So as a result, I think they sort of have a bad taste in their mouth as a result of that. But I want to basically take this opportunity and do this video in defense of Doug and go really through some of the reasons. Once again, you can watch the video. I go into a little bit of the reasons why I thought he'd be a good candidate. But I'm going to go into even a little more detail on this in terms of breaking down exactly what I said in that video to really talk about why I think this is a good move. The main reason that I gave for why I thought Doug Pederson would be a good candidate had to do with the fact that I really like the idea of a backup quarterback serving as a coach or as a head coach. And historically, if you look at quarterbacks that have become coaches, the backups have been more successful than the starting quarterbacks. For instance, there are 5 Hall of Fame quarterbacks that ended up becoming head coaches. All of them had below 500 records as a head coach. And only one of them, Bart Starr, made one playoff appearance where he won one game and then was out in the next round. And that happened to be in the season in the early 80s when they had the strike. So they had a lot of teams that made the playoffs that might not have made it had it been a full season. So it's really even hard to take anything away from that. So the track record for Hall of Fame quarterbacks as head coaches was not good. If you look at quarterbacks that were starters in the league and then became head coaches, it's sort of limited on who was there. Jim Zorn is one that started for a number of years for the Seattle Seahawks. He was not a success for the Washington Redskins as a head coach. And then Jim Harbaugh is the other one that was a starter for most of his career with the Bears and then the Colts. And obviously he had some success with the 49ers, but I think for other reasons, based on not just his X's and O's, I think for other reasons that obviously ended in San Francisco, and now he's at the University of Michigan. But if you look at some of the quarterbacks that were sort of, they played a significant part of their career as a backup. They're not necessarily, weren't backups their whole career, but were backups for a significant portion of their career. Some names that really jump out at me are Tom Flores, who won 2 Super Bowls with the Raiders as a head coach, Sam White, who took the Bengals to a Super Bowl and had some success as a head coach. And then the current one that was a career backup to John Elway is Gary Kubiak, who was the first guy to take the Houston Texans to the playoffs and actually win them a playoff game or 2 playoff games with the Houston Texans. And now he's the quarterback for the Denver Broncos, and they're the top seed of the AFC this year. So for that reason, I think if you really look at the history of backup quarterbacks in this league, it really shows, I think, that they actually end up making better head coaches than the starting quarterbacks do. And I think, like I explained in the prior video I did, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're sitting on the sidelines and they see the game from a different perspective. And they don't rely on their physical skills, because if they had the physical skills, they'd be starters. So they have to sort of take more of a cerebral or mental approach to the game that really looks at the strategy behind it and sort of the play calling and some of the schemes that you can develop. So as a result of all that, I think they end up making better coaches as a result. So don't judge Doug Pederson just based on the fact that he was essentially a backup quarterback for us. Even though he started the season when Donovan was a rookie, really he was a placeholder. So don't necessarily take his playing days as a reason for why maybe you're sour on his candidacy as a head coach. Look at the history of backup quarterbacks, and they have done usually better than starting quarterbacks in the head coaching role. But let's also take a look at what Doug Pederson has done this year with the Kansas City Chiefs as their offensive coordinator, because that's really what we should be judging him on, is based on what he has done. In terms of the Kansas City Chiefs offense, their yards per game is not that impressive. In fact, they're 27th in the league in yards per game. But the kind of interesting thing about their offense is while they're relatively low in yards per game, they're 9th in the league in points per game, which suggests that while they move the ball maybe not as well as other teams, when they do move the ball, they put points on the board. And if you look at some of their other stats, I think it'll explain exactly maybe why that is the case. Specifically, if you look at the rushing stats for the team, they're 6th in rushing in terms of yards per game, but they're 30th in passing. So from that perspective, obviously, if you're very high in running the ball, it means you're going to be eating up the clock a lot more, so that you're not going to have as many plays per game. So that's why your yardage could be down, but your points be up. And that's actually reflected in the fact in their yards per game, yards per play, the Chiefs are 12th in the league. So while their yardage as a whole is down, the yards they have per play is on the higher side in terms of they're in the top half of the league. So all those things, I think, suggest what we really have to look at when we're looking at the Chiefs, and that is their quarterback just is not that strong, and they don't throw the ball as much as maybe you think they would under an Andy Reid type of offense. So, for instance, they're actually pretty much dead even in their runs per game and their pass attempts per game. They're just slightly have more pass attempts than rushing attempts. But in today's NFL, the fact that they're that close is basically saying something, because the league is so pass happy now. So from that perspective, I think that it shows that they are running the ball more than maybe other teams do. In fact, they were 12th in the league in rushing attempts per game, whereas they were 29th in the league in passing attempts per game. So even though they are passing the ball slightly more than they're running the ball, they're not doing it near as much as the rest of the league is. So if you really look at all those stats, I think it really suggests that this is a team that has decided that the best way they can win games is winning it on the ground, allowing Alex Smith to do some things here and there, but not relying on him too much, and basically ask him not to make mistakes. And that's reflected in the fact that of all the teams in the NFL, the Chiefs had the fewest number of interceptions this year. So from that perspective, that is something hopefully he can bring to us and really help develop a quarterback. And that's really what it comes down to. The reason that I have the most excitement about Doug Pederson versus some of the other candidates they were looking at. And that is the fact that I think he could develop a young quarterback. The biggest decision this team needs to make in this offseason isn't actually their head coach. I think it's what they're going to be doing at quarterback. Are they going to bring Sam Bradford back, or are they going to try and sign someone else as a free agent, or are they just going to look at the draft and try and draft someone young? Either way, I'd like them to pick someone, even if it's either in the draft or on the younger side, to really develop in the long term. So from that perspective, I really think that Doug Pederson is a good hire for that reason. Now, I will say this about Doug Pederson. I did grade him at a B when I was doing my grades, and the main reason I was grading him at a B is because I really wanted to see the Eagles look at some other candidates. I really wanted to see them look at some defensive candidates. They didn't interview any coaches on the defensive side of the football. Specifically, obviously, I really wanted them to take a look at Sean McDermott, but for whatever reason, they decided not to go in that direction. But I'm okay, like I said, with the Doug Pederson hire. I think he can be a really good candidate, and I think in the long term, it might not happen right away, but in the long term, I think this team could really be good with him in terms of hopefully developing an offense. They've got some core players on that defensive side of the football. If they get a coach on that side of the football that can put them together, from that perspective, I really think that they could be successful on the defensive side of the football. They just need someone to really figure out the offense and where they're going to go with this thing. Like I said, the encouraging thing I did see in the Kansas City statistics is the fact that they did run the ball more than other teams. And if you've got a guy like DeMarco Murray, hey, we need to use him the way he needs to be used and not trying to fit the square peg in the round hole like Chip Kelly did with him in running plays that were not to his strength. So let's run him between the tackles, out of a formation where the quarterback's under center, and hopefully his game can improve. And if we can improve the offensive line, which is another big reason why I think DeMarco Murray struggled, that would also be a big help to the running game. And I think having come from the Andy Reid coaching tree, Doug Pederson's going to get the importance of the offensive line. So from that perspective, I also think he's going to be good for us. So for all those reasons, like I said, I'm excited about the hire. I know there's a lot of people in Eagle land that aren't, but I think it's a good hire, and I think it's something that we should be excited about. But leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Am I off my rocker? Do you think that this is a terrible hire? Would you have preferred to see him go with a guy like Tom Coughlin? Or in another direction, who would you have wanted to see him hire if you think that the Doug Pederson hire is so bad? So leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. And I'll be checking in, of course, as we go through the offseason, as they try and figure out exactly what they're going to be doing at the quarterback position. That's obviously going to be something we'll be taking a look at. And I'll give you some of my thoughts on those as we go through the offseason. Until then, fly, Eagles, fly.